Hey guys, and welcome back. In this video today we're going to talk about torque and horsepower, and a lot of people kind of get this a little bit wrong because they go, Mike, I'm going to build a single port because I want to have more torque than I can with a dual port. And to be honest, if you've just all you have is single port heads, then you're going to use them, or maybe you just want the look of a single port. But you can actually build an engine with more torque with dual port than you can with a single port. Let's get into it. So guys, you can actually build more torque into a dual port than a single port, believe it or not. It's all about this. There's exhaust size, there's engine stroke. The more stroke to bore, so if you have a larger stroke than you have bore, that's going to give you more torque. If you have higher compression, that's going to give you more torque. If you can get more air and fuel in and actually burn it at a lower RPM, that's going to give you more torque. The engine size, if it's larger, even if the bore and stroke are not or over square, under square, whatever, the larger the engine, going to give you more torque. Having the proper exhaust size is going to give you more torque. Like if your exhaust is really small, it's going to give you more torque, but you want your torque curve to be at about 3,500 RPMs or right around there. That's your drivability speeds. In other words, as your engine builds RPMs, you want it to go up to 3,500, and then it can still go up from there, but you want the bulk of your curve to reach 3,500, and that's going to give you the most drivability torque that you can possibly get. Now, Volkswagen kind of did this because they used a really small exhaust pipe. That's one of the reasons they have those, because these engines were made to run up to about 3,500 RPMs, and that's it. 3,800 max. On the bus, they weren't shy. Look at that small exhaust, 1.25 inches coming out of there. They wanted a small exhaust, but that had very big limitations. If you want to get more torque in your engine than that and have more power so that you can go a little faster on the freeway, you have to change that. Now this little 36 horsepower build has an incredible amount of torque and a nice usable horsepower range. So it goes up to about 4,500, revs at about 4,500. There's power all the way up to that. The torque peak probably is around 3,500 or so, something like that. And it's all right where you need it. It has really good low end because I have an 1.25 inch exhaust on it. So just driving it around at really low RPMs, it's super torquey. It gets up to speed. You can just drive it nice and easy. Those are the types of things I like in an engine build. I'm not trying to build like race cars where I'm going high performance, and I know a lot of you guys are trying to build street cars too, and you want it to be nice and torquey. Torquey should be the thing you're going after. So now if you look at things, the more torque, the more horsepower you build, the more torque you build, but it's going to be at higher RPMs. That's not usable torque. The torque you want is the torque in that engine RPM range. So now you guys might say, well, you put a single port in this. The reason I put a single port in this is because I wanted it to look original. It wasn't about getting more torque with the single port. The single port does not bring more torque. It just has limits on the RPMs, so it feels like people think, well, it's better torque, it's more usable torque and that sort of thing, but it's not more torque. I could have gotten way more torque at the same RPM range with a dual port on this one as I did with a single. I just didn't want the look of the single port or the dual port. I wanted the look of a single port in it, so when you open it up, it has the pump running and all that. You can see it looks like an original engine, even though the original engine was a 40 horse. Now the reason I didn't go with 40 horse heads, I could have used 40 horse heads, widened the intake manifold, and did all that stuff and made it look exactly like a 40 horse. But the reason I didn't, because the valves are so small, and I would lose torque doing that. Because the whole idea is to get your horsepower. You need horsepower to get torque. You need to get your horsepower up at a peak at a lower RPM. That's going to give you the most amount of torque. That's the whole idea of it. It's not, that a single port's going to give you more torque. It's just that I want my RPM range to be kind of maxed out, where it brings on the most power at that RPM range of like 3,500, 3,800 RPMs. So the ways you can do that is, again, increase the compression ratio. If you have an increased compression ratio, that's going to help. If you have a better flow through your heads at lower RPM, even having some port work done is going to help with torque. Now, that's also going to help you with top end power, but again, if you have good flow going through your heads, a lot of air and fuel getting into the combustion chamber, and you have enough compression to fire it. So if your compression's too low and you've got a big cam, it's not going to help you get more torque. Okay, you want to have the proper size cam for the combustion that you're making. So if you have a larger engine, you put a bigger cam in, that's okay. A smaller engine, you're going to want a smaller cam, and you want the right one so that you have the most amount of torque at that engine RPM. Or actually horsepower. You want your horsepower to come on lower RPM. Okay, that's how you achieve the most amount of torque. You can look at this stuff. You can go on to there's calculators on torque and horsepower. You can go on there and it'll kind of give, put some numbers in, play around with it a little bit. It'll help you understand how this stuff works. So sometimes it takes a little trial and error. Okay, I was trying to get the most amount of horsepower at a low RPM on this thing with a single port. So I went with the small 1.25" exhaust that came on it, the original exhaust. It was too small to get up to the horsepower, and torque was coming on at about 2,000 RPMs. And then to get above that to 3,500 or right around there where you drive it on the freeway, it was actually pushing the engine too much and creating heat. So a smaller exhaust is going to help you get more torque to an extent at a lower RPM. But if you have too small of an exhaust, then it won't get up to a high enough RPM to be able to run. So you want, again, you might have to go a little bigger, but you want a smaller exhaust to create torque. You're looking for the engine to create its maximum flow at that RPM that you're going to be driving it in. So having the perfect size exhaust for the engine size is really important. Like if you put an 1 5/8" on a small 2-liter and you're trying to get torque, the torque's going to come in at way high RPMs. So you want, say, an 1.25" or 1.5", or 1.5" or 1 3/8", depends on the engine size. So if you're running like an 1835, 1 3/8" is probably about right. If you're running a small 2-liter, probably an 1.5" is going to be about right. So like on this bus right here, I'm running 1.25". It's a 2007 that's in here. It's the perfect combination for this engine. Again, on this one here, I did overcam it a little bit. So that kind of plays against me a little bit as far as achieving that torque maximum at the RPMs, but it does help it run cooler. So those are compromises you make when you're trying to make your engine build. I wanted this thing to run cool to where I could slam my foot on the floor, and it does it. All day long, I can just floor it going up a hill, doesn't care. Now I could have achieved more torque by putting more compression in it. And also that would help burn the fuel better. And having it burn the fuel more evenly would give me more torque. But then again, I'm also creating heat by creating too much more compression. So the more compression you run, the more potential you have for detonation or heat. But again, a higher compression ratio can help achieve more torque because it's burning the fuel more efficiently. That's what you're trying to do, get it to burn efficiently and reach flow at the achieved RPMs in drivability. And again, so if you've got the wrong transmission gears in and you've got your engine revving really high going down the freeway, then you need to probably change your transmission gears to be in that achieved level of, say, 2,800 to about 3,500 RPMs on the freeway. Those are the, Gene Berg says 3,300. I mean, he's pretty damn close to being right on. Now you can run, I've heard guys say 2,800 is too low. I've run 2,800 on the freeway. It all depends on how much air you're pushing. There's just a whole bunch of factors in there, but even 2800 can be fine, depending on the engine, depending on the fan you have, depending on the cooling system you have. If you have a doghouse or if you have a dual cooler system, 2800 can be great. And if you have the proper cam, you can go above the 3500 mark. Okay, but it's all, you got to have everything right. Okay, it's no guesswork here. So when you're trying to achieve torque, okay, remember horsepower and torque are relative. As what you're trying to do is, again, get that maximum horsepower at the achieved lower RPM you're trying to get to. When guys, you can have an engine that has, a lot more torque, okay, that's unusable. So you could build a big engine and have dual carbs on it and short intakes. The longer the intake runner, the more torque you build. Remember the old tunnel rams on the V8 engines? Those were to help you get off the line. That was to give you more torque out of the hole. And then the straightness of them was to give you more horsepower at the top end. So that was what the whole idea of those was. Kind of like this setup. You see these long intake runners I put on this? They could have made those a lot shorter, okay? But the longer they made them almost to the point where they hit the deck lid. This guy knew what he was doing. He wanted more torque for this little engine. So he made longer intake runners, okay? And that's why on a bus, I like to use the stock intake because it's longer. You get more torque from a longer intake runner. Longer intake runner, smaller exhaust. To an extent, you guys, if too small for the engine, it's not going to work. More compression, longer stroke. The longer stroke is basically putting a pry bar on your engine. If you figure further, the longer the stroke is going to give you more torque. The stroke to piston size ratio. If you have a long stroke and a small piston, that's going to give you more torque. Even more timing at lower RPM can give you more torque. But timing can be a vicious game. If you play too much in the low RPMs, then you may not have enough when you go to the top end, and you may have detonation issues. So you have to be very careful playing with that. The bigger the CC of the engine, regardless of whether it's the crankshaft size or the piston size, the larger the CC, total CC of the engine, it's going to give you more torque because you've got more air and fuel available to burn with a bigger engine. So if you can develop that into a lower RPM where it burns the best at a lower RPM, that's going to give you the most amount of torque. So the whole thing is you want to achieve that within the driving range you're using. And this is where I went wrong on the bucket truck is I had that little tiny exhaust and it was achieving maximum horsepower at like 2,000 RPMs. And I needed to get it to 3,500. So I had to use a larger exhaust. I'm just trying to tell you guys this so you understand what you're trying to achieve. It's not just a single port that can do that. It's a dual port can do it. A dual port can do it better because there's more air and fuel going into the mixture, into the combustion chamber, which you could add a larger cylinder to burn it, or more compression. So you can do a lot more with a dual port than you can with a single port. It just depends on what you want. If you want the look of a single port, then you put it together in a single port and you use the same ideas to come up with the maximum torque. If you don't care, then the dual port's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Okay, so those are just a few things to think about if you're trying to build an engine for torque. I hope that helps you understand it. I hope I've explained it all. And I, it's kind of hard to explain, but if you take some of those things, remember torque and horsepower are relative. You have to have horsepower to develop torque. You have to have, one, they both work together. And if you have an engine that's torque is way up at the high end RPMs, then it's unusable torque. And, you want your torque to be in a usable range. So the way to do that is to develop the engine so that the engine develops its horsepower at a lower RPM. And that's going to give you more torque for drivability And that's what I usually do. This engine here, by the way, has excellent low-end driving torque. It drives around amazing because of the 1.25 inch exhaust. I maybe could go with 1.5 inch. It'd probably work. But, you know, and it doesn't have too small of an exhaust so that it doesn't get hot on the freeway at all. Those are things that I've already kind of checked out. And the dual carbs, you know, even though they're dual, it has long intake runners for them. So it helps really with the torque. And it also has some pretty good horsepower at about 4,500. I mean, this thing just is a great combination. So those are things you're looking for. Great combination that works good with the engine, with the engine size you have, and also works good with the gear ratios you have. It's really important. The gear ratios are just as important as the engine. If you have the wrong gear ratios in it for the tire sizes you have, it's not gonna work correctly. Okay, so trying to figure all that stuff out is really, really important. It took me years to figure out all this stuff, and it might help you to get your mind thinking the right way, so you can do your own and figure it out for yourself. And you know, because you know, I'm not gonna be here forever. You guys got to do it on your own someday. All right, I'll talk to you in the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe.